From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. Congress returned to Washington this past week, facing a daunting agenda as it tries to wind up its work for 2017. Still left to be dealt with a major overhaul of the tax system and a new debt limit spending legislation to avoid another government shutdown looming next week. Joining us on Inside Politics to discuss these topics and other issues looming in Washington is Dr. Bruce Oppenheimer of Vanderbilt University. He's a political science professor and is considered an expert on congressional matters. Dr. Oppenheimer, thanks for coming on the show and welcome back.
Always a pleasure to be here, Pat.
Now, one thing I didn't mention in the opening is the ever-looming Russian investigation. There is breaking news as we begin this day that there is a plea deal about to be done by Michael Flynn, who's the former national security advisor for President Trump. He is pleading guilty to lying to the FBI, apparently over some of the same issues that got him fired from the White House in terms of his dealings with the Russian ambassador. What are your thoughts about the meaning of this in terms of the investigation?
It's pretty clear, given the modest nature of the indictments, lying to the FBI as opposed to other things where Flynn looked culpable, that the FBI has cut a deal with him and that he's going to be a cooperating witness. And the question is, what is he going to be a cooperating witness about? This will be about people who are probably, in some senses, in this overall investigation above Flynn in the food chain.
Now, at this point, at least in what's in the plea deal, it doesn't appear this is a direct implication of the president, because this is the matter upon which Mr. Flynn was fired. But you seem to feel like there may be other issues more directly involved with the president that perhaps Mr. Flynn may be asked to testify about as a part of this plea deal.
Yes, it seemed to me that Flynn was culpable on a whole bunch of other things, that he looked like a person that was going to be in trouble, not just Flynn, but his son as well. And I suspect that this is a deal that he's getting off relatively easily, given what he could have been charged with. He's avoiding, obviously, a lot of legal costs. But there's got to be a trade-off.
The timing is somewhat interesting in the sense that I understand that next week or in the next few days, the special counsel, Robert Mueller, is going to have to disclose how much money has been spent on his investigation so far. That's obviously going to create some backlash and some conversation in Washington saying it's too much money, we need to shut down the investigation. But after this particular plea deal, that certainly gives the special investigator the opportunity to say, well, look, this is also here, so we need to continue the investigation.
I suspect, given Mueller's nature of professionalism, that he's aware of these things, but they're not the first priority on his mind, that he's got a very elaborate series of issues to go through, and I think they have strategically done this as they were ready to do it. And my sense is, perhaps you're right, but I don't think that's the big issue, and that will pass probably pretty quickly.
And let's get back to Washington and let's get back more into Congress. President Trump and the congressional leaders in the Republican side thought they had big plans to unveil and to get implemented in 2017. They struck out on health care, and now they've put just about all their eggs in the basket to get some kind of major legislation passed in 2017 on tax reform and a major tax cut.
It's hard to label a tax reform, Pat.
Well, they call it tax reform.
Yes.
One person's reform is always somebody else's,
yes,
not so much.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts? It looks like they're as close as ever to getting the bill through the Senate, and that's being debated even as we speak.
Yes, and they had some snafus last night when they thought they had things put together, when the triggering mechanism, the parliamentarian said you cannot put that in reconciliation.
Senator Corker was one of the ones pushing.
Right. You cannot put that in a reconciliation bill. Things sort of fell apart last night. They seemingly have gotten a couple of Republicans on board this morning, but they got them on board, Senator Johnson and Senator Daines, by allowing the pass-through, a way in which business people can pay at a different rate than they would than regular income, extended to some smaller businesses. The problem with that is that's probably a revenue loser, which means you have to make it up somewhere else.
And that would mean, based on some of the studies that are coming out, particularly ones that came out yesterday from one of the bipartisan groups that Congress looks to analyze these, that the deficit coming out of this Senate bill as it's currently proposed is already looked to be $1 trillion, and this might add even further to that.
Yeah, it's $1 trillion over 10 years if you use as the Joint Committee on Taxation estimated with dynamic scoring, and dynamic scoring allowed them to put in some estimate of how much additional revenue would be raised by the economic stimulus that this is supposed to create, and so it's probably a generous idea that it's only $1 trillion over 10 years. But that's much higher than Republicans were hoping for.
With the triggers no longer allowed in the bill, Senator Corker would seem to be back into the unknown as far as what he's going to vote for. That may also be true with Senator Flake out of Arizona. And also Susan Collins of Maine was looking for some changes in the health care area as a part of that bill, and she's not going to get those. But the Republicans, it would appear to me, only need to get one of those three to be able to have enough votes to at least get 50, if not 51.
Yes, and I think that they really won't try to get more than one of those three. That is, they will not invest in going beyond getting 50 votes, and if you need Mike Pence to vote for it, you'll get Pence's vote.
Perhaps Susan Collins will be more of their target in this because she may have a cheaper price tag in terms of what it costs to the bill than to get Corker and Flake in.
I think it's anyone's guess as to who they try to get in, right? And they will let the other two walk. My sense is that they're not going to. The part of the problem is it's one of those things, if you push in on one side and it balloons out somewhere else. And given the overall parameters,
like that, isn't it?
Given the overall parameters of a reconciliation bill, once you have that figure, anything you do in the way of amending it that increases the deficit, you got to get something else that cuts it back down. So there has to be some trade-offs.
You've watched the Congress and the Senate in particular for many years. We continue to have this situation where there's some bills, because of the reconciliation process, can be passed with only 51 votes. Others require 60, and that will include the debt bill we'll talk about probably in the second block. It doesn't seem to make Congress any easier to work. In fact, it seems less functional than I've ever remembered it. Has you ever seen anything quite like this?
Well, one of the real problems you have in Congress, and you've had for some time, is you have very close splits, very close majorities, right? So you're dealing with 52-48 in the Senate. In the House, the margins have been pretty small, except for the first Obama Congress. It's the only time you had, and the first Obama Congress where the Democrats briefly had 60 senators. That makes it very hard to work, and it gives an incentive for the minority party not to cooperate. So they let the majority do it on its own and take all the hits of doing so and figure we can come back after the next election, we may be in the majority. And the Republicans, when they were in the minority, did the same thing.
Dr. Bruce Oppenheimer of Vanderbilt University is our guest. We're talking about issues in Washington, particularly in Congress, looming in this final month of the year with a busy calendar up there, lots of things to do, and what's also been a sort of a crazy news week in Washington. Back to continue our conversation after this break.